The phone rang on a Wednesday evening while I was sorting through a pile of bills at my kitchen table. Nothing unusual about the evening, just me, a cooling mug of tea, and the quiet hum of the refrigerator. I picked up without checking the number. The man on the other end did not say hello. He said, "Mrs. Whitaker, this is a call regarding 3 personal loans taken out in your name. The combined balance is $87,000. Payments are months overdue, and your accounts are being moved to active collections. Wage garnishment is being considered." I set down my pen. I told him plainly that he had the wrong person. I had never taken out any personal loans. He did not pause. He read my social security number aloud, digit by digit, then my date of birth, then an old home address I had not lived at in 11 years. He told me the applications each listed my brother Michael as both a reference and a co-applicant. My stomach went hollow. I hung up without another word. My hands were shaking. The bills on the table in front of me suddenly looked like props from someone else's ordinary life. I sat there in my kitchen and thought about 40 years. 40 years of stepping in for Michael after our father walked away and left us. Years of handing him money I did not spare easily, and watching him promise to pay it back without ever doing it. Years of showing up as the steady one, for his emergencies, for his rent gaps, for his business plans that always started strong and ended with a phone call asking for help. He had used my name, my number, my history. He had quietly opened loans I knew nothing about and let them fall into collections while I tended my garden and paid my own bills like always. I pressed my hands flat against the table and told myself not to fall apart. Not yet. My name is Hannah Whitaker. I am 67 years old, and I spent 31 years as a school nurse in the same coastal Virginia district. I retired 4 years ago. Before that, I nursed my late husband Walter through the last 2 years of his illness, the hardest thing I have ever done, and the thing I am most proud of. I live simply. My pension is modest and reliable. I have a small house, a back garden where tomatoes do well, and a cat named Biscuit, who claims the kitchen chair as his own. That night after the collector's call, I could not sleep. I lay in the dark trying to piece together a timeline. When had this started? The collector had said 14 months. 14 months of accounts opened and money spent in my name, while I went about my ordinary days without any idea. At sunrise, I drove to the public library and used their computer to pull my free credit reports from all 3 major bureaus. What I found made me sit very still in that plastic chair for a long time. 5 accounts, 5 separate loans and credit cards opened in my name across the past year and a half, totaling $142,000. Not the $87,000 the collector had mentioned. 142. Late payments had hit every account. My credit score, maintained carefully for 35 years, had already been driven into the ground without a single person telling me it was happening. I walked out to my car and sat in the parking lot with the printed pages in my lap. I did not cry right away. I just looked at the numbers and thought about what it means to have your own name used like a tool that was never meant for you. Then I said, quietly and firmly, "This ends now." And I meant every word of it completely. I drove straight to the police station the next morning. The officer who took my report was thorough and kind. He explained that family identity theft cases were among the most difficult to prosecute. Victims often backed down, evidence got muddied, and prosecutors grew cautious. He filed the report, but told me to go in with realistic expectations. I thanked him and told him my expectations were already fully realistic. I just needed the report number. That same afternoon, I called all 3 credit bureaus and placed a fraud freeze on my account. No new credit could be opened in my name without a personal unfreeze from me alone. Then I typed formal dispute letters for every fraudulent account, 1 per lender, each one with the police report number and a certified copy attached. I mailed every letter with return receipt requested and kept a copy of everything in a new folder I labeled simply, Truth. That evening I called Michael. He answered on the second ring. The television was going in the background. I could hear Deborah somewhere nearby, and then I could hear her stop moving when she heard my voice. I told Michael what the collector had said. I told him what I had found on the credit reports. I spoke evenly and waited. He laughed. Actual laughter. He said, "Helen, relax. It's just paperwork. The family helps the family. Pay a couple of months and I promise we'll sort it out on our end." From somewhere near him, I heard my mother Evelyn's voice. "Don't be dramatic, dear. Blood is thicker than credit scores." I hung up and sat at my kitchen table with the truth folder in front of me. My heart was going fast, but my hands were steady. I made a note of the date and time of the call and added it to the folder. The following morning, I made an appointment with a consumer protection attorney named Ruth. Ruth's office was above a frame shop on a side street 2 miles from my house. She had bright eyes and a direct way of speaking that made me trust her immediately. I spread everything across her desk: the credit reports, the dispute letters, the police report, the folder, and she read through it all without interrupting me once. When she finished, she looked up and said, "Every one of these accounts is fraudulent. We are going to fight all of them, and we are going to win most of them quickly. The question is how long the holdouts take." She helped me draft formal demand letters to every lender, citing the fraud report and demanding immediate account removal. 2 of the smaller lenders, a credit card company and a short-term loan servicer, deleted the accounts within a week. They saw the police report and the inconsistencies in the application records and apparently decided the paperwork was not worth their trouble. The largest lender pushed back. They wanted handwriting samples, notarized statements, and a full signed affidavit before they would even open an internal review. Ruth said this was not unusual. She filed the affidavit and said we might be waiting. That same evening, Evelyn appeared at my front door. She was carrying a casserole dish covered in aluminum foil, and she had her soft face on, the one she wore whenever she needed me to agree to something uncomfortable. She said Michael's business was going through a genuinely hard stretch. She said this one time I could just help him through it, and the family would move past it together. I told her plainly that the truth hurt more than any debt. She left without much more to say. I watched her car pull away and then noticed, parked halfway down the block, Michael's truck. Engine off. Just sitting there watching my house. I closed my door and added a note to the folder. The credit bureau investigations moved at the speed that government-adjacent processes always move, which is to say, slowly and with no regard for the urgency you feel on the other. I received form letters acknowledging receipt of my disputes. I received requests for additional documentation. I provided everything requested, certified, with return receipts. One of the larger lenders, a bank that had issued a $22,000 personal loan, called me in for a recorded interview with their fraud unit. I sat across from their investigator in a small conference room and answered every question as clearly and directly as I could. Before I left, I played her the voicemail Michael had left the previous week. Him laughing, calling it just paperwork, telling me to pay a couple months and he would handle the rest. She listened twice. She asked me to send a certified copy to the legal department. I did it that same afternoon. They still took 3 more weeks to respond, but when they did, they removed the account. Then a new envelope arrived in my mailbox. Plain white, no return address, postmarked from a town 30 miles away. Inside was a billing statement for another personal loan, $18,000, opened 11 months ago, already 60 days past due. A loan I had never heard of. I stood in my kitchen holding that statement and felt the particular exhaustion of a person who keeps finding new damage every time they think they have reached the bottom of the hole. I opened the folder and added it. That night, my mother left a voicemail. Her voice was quiet and hard, in a way it only got when she had decided something. She said, "If you keep pushing this, you will ruin your brother. And if you ruin your brother, you ruin this family. Think carefully, Helen." I saved the voicemail and added it to the folder with the date and time written on the label. A process server came to my door on a Thursday morning, apologetic in the way of someone who has delivered unwelcome documents many times before. He handed me the legal notice, said good morning, and left. The largest lender had filed suit against Michael and Deborah for the unpaid balance and named me as a co-signer with shared liability. They were pulling all 3 parties in together to see who settled first. I called Ruth before noon. She said this was not surprising and not a disaster. She said we had exactly what we needed. 2 weeks later, I sat in that courtroom with Ruth and my folder. The lender's attorney presented the loan documents. Ruth presented the police report, the fraud affidavit, the certified voicemail recording, and a detailed chart showing that every piece of contact information on every application, phone numbers, backup addresses, emergency contacts, traced exclusively to Michael's household and not mine. Then she played the voicemail through the courtroom speaker. Michael's easy laughter filled the room. The judge dismissed the case against me before the lunch recess. The tight knot in my chest loosened by one small degree. Not completely, just slightly. There was still much left to resolve. Driving home, I turned onto my street and found Deborah's car parked in front of my house. She rolled down her window as I pulled into the driveway. Her voice was tight and slightly too high, the way voices get when someone has been rehearsing what to say. She said, "You are dismantling our entire lives over a few late payments. Do you understand what you are doing to this family, Helen?" I looked at her for exactly 1 moment. Then I walked to my front door without responding. My knees were less steady than my expression. But I had learned long ago that the two things do not need to match. Officer Paulson was the detective assigned to my identity theft case. He was methodical and unhurried in the way that experienced investigators often are. The kind of person who writes everything down in a small notebook and asks the same question twice from different angles to see if the answer changes. He interviewed Michael 3 weeks after I filed the report. Michael denied any knowledge of the loans at first. Then, when pressed about specific details, he shifted. He said I had given him verbal permission years ago, a general standing agreement that he could use my financial information as backing if his business ever hit a serious rough patch. He said this with complete confidence. Evelyn submitted a written statement through his attorney. She said she remembered a conversation at a family dinner where I had made exactly this offer to Michael, and she had been present. Ruth subpoenaed the loan application records from 3 banks simultaneously. Every application had used an old personal email address of mine, an account I had not actively used in 9 years, but that my immediate family still knew. No identity thief pulling my information from a data breach would have found that address. Only someone inside my life would have known to use it. Officer Paulson told Ruth the forensic picture was building toward something solid. Then Evelyn fell. She slipped on her back steps, a genuine accident by all accounts, and fractured her wrist. She was admitted for observation, and Michael called me from the hospital parking lot, his voice wet and cracked. He said the stress of the situation was affecting her health. He said if I kept pushing the case and something happened to her, that would be on me. I told him I was sorry about her wrist. I told him the truth still had to come out. I hung up. A new collection call came in immediately on the other line. The second month brought the first real forward movement. 2 disputed accounts completed their internal reviews and were formally removed from my credit report. I watched my score move upward by a real, if modest, amount. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something approaching the possibility that the ground might eventually become solid again beneath me. I allowed myself 4 careful hours of cautious optimism. Then Ruth called. Michael's attorney had filed a counterclaim. It alleged that I had co-signed the loans willingly and was now attempting to defraud multiple lenders by falsely claiming identity theft. The filing described me as motivated by jealousy, bitter resentment of my brother's entrepreneurial spirit and his ability to build something larger than my quiet, retired life on a fixed pension. I read the counterclaim sitting at my kitchen table and let every word of it settle completely before I responded. Then I went to the spare bedroom closet and pulled a storage box from the top shelf. Inside were 22 years of paper records. Every loan I had made to Michael, written out with dates, amounts, and both our signatures, because I had learned early that handshakes with Michael were never sufficient documentation. Every canceled check stub, every birthday card in which he had tucked, between the printed greeting and his signature, a specific dollar request for that year. I spread everything across the dining room table and photographed each document methodically with my phone. Not jealousy. A meticulous 2-decade record of generosity flowing in one direction only, never once returning. I sent the photographs to Ruth that evening with a message. Here is every single time I helped him. Let him explain the jealousy theory to a judge now. She replied within the hour. She said the counterclaim was going to collapse entirely, and she was genuinely looking forward to watching it happen in the hearing room. The counterclaim hearing was on a Tuesday. I wore the gray blazer I had bought for Walter's memorial service and arrived 15 minutes early. Ruth met me at the entrance, and we walked in together. Michael sat at the opposing table looking composed and well-dressed, the practiced confidence of a man who had always been able to talk his way through difficult rooms. For a moment, watching him arrange his papers with that familiar ease, I felt the old pull. The reflex of someone who has spent decades managing herself around another person's comfort. Then I thought about the storage box and the folder, and I sat up straight. Ruth presented the complete timeline, account by account, application date by date, showing exactly what information had been used on each form and precisely where that information originated. She placed before the judge a chart demonstrating that every phone number, every backup contact, every secondary address on every fraudulent application connected to Michael's household and not to mine. The judge studied the chart carefully. Then he looked at Michael directly and asked him to explain why the applications contained contact information that matched his residence exclusively. Michael started an explanation twice and finished neither attempt. His attorney tried to redirect, and the judge waved the effort aside with a short, clear gesture. The counterclaim was dismissed. The judge's closing remarks included the word perjury, not as a direct charge, but placed deliberately enough that everyone in the room understood its weight. I left the courthouse feeling the ground more solidly beneath me than I had in weeks. That night, someone knocked my mailbox flat and spray-painted snitch across my garage door in red letters. I photographed the damage before going inside, filed a supplemental police report, and added the photos to the folder. Then I made dinner. They were rattled and growing desperate. Both of those things were useful to know. The formal charge letter from the district attorney's office arrived on a Friday. It was addressed to me as a material witness and informed me that Michael Edward Whitaker was being charged with 3 counts of identity theft and 2 counts of financial fraud. The investigation was ongoing. Additional charges were possible as the review of financial records continued. I read the letter twice at the kitchen counter. Then I put it in the folder. More counts were cleared from my credit report as the investigations deepened and the documentation I had provided to the bureaus worked its way through their internal processes. My score was no longer in the territory that would make a loan officer laugh. It still was not where it had been before any of this, but it was moving. That same Friday, Evelyn called. She had been released from the hospital 2 days earlier with her wrist in a splint and apparently with renewed energy for making phone calls. Her voice on the line was unsteady in a way that sounded genuine, the shake of an older woman who was frightened for her son and not entirely pretending about it. She said Michael could go to prison. She said he was her child, whatever mistakes he had made, and she needed me to understand what I was doing to the family by continuing. I told her I had not done anything to the family. Michael had done this to the family. I was only telling the truth about it. She cried. I let her. Then Deborah left a message after the call, 12 minutes long, which I listened to in full while washing the dishes. She described the state of her marriage, the stress on her children, and the particular cruelty of a sister-in-law who chose a credit score over blood. She said all of this in a voice that was trying to sound injured, but mostly sounded afraid. I saved the message and labeled the file. The prosecutor assigned to the case was Attorney Hollis. Calm, methodical, possessed of the patience that comes from having taken complicated financial crimes to trial before and won. She met with Ruth and me on a Wednesday morning and walked through what my testimony would cover and how Michael's attorney would likely challenge it. I agreed to testify without hesitation. The hollow feeling in my chest when I imagined sitting in that courtroom was real, but it was not going to stop me from telling the truth. In the weeks between that meeting and the trial date, something happened that I had not permitted myself to expect. One of the last resistant lenders, A bank that had been requesting additional affidavits, handwriting analysis, and supplemental notarized documents for months, completed their review. Their letter was 3 sentences. The account was removed. The balance was cleared. My credit score jumped 41 points in the next reporting cycle. I sat on my back porch that afternoon and looked at the garden for a long time. The tomatoes were producing well. The lavender along the fence was thick with bees from early morning to late afternoon. I stayed out there and let myself feel something that was not quite hope, but was clearly pointed in that direction. Then that same evening, I heard a car pull into my driveway. I looked through the front window. Michael was on my porch under the light, thinner than I remembered, knocking twice and stepping back to wait. I opened the main door and kept the screen latched between us. He said, "Helen, please, call the prosecutor's office and tell them this can still be resolved inside the family. Tell them it was a misunderstanding between relatives." I looked at my brother through the screen in the quiet of the evening. He was thinner than I had ever seen him. I said nothing for a long moment and let the silence between us do its own honest work. I told Michael I would not be calling the prosecutor on his behalf. I said it without cruelty, clearly and finally, the way you state something that is simply not going to change. He kept talking. He said the business was finished and could not be recovered. He said Deborah was on the verge of leaving and taking the children with her. He said he had not slept properly in 3 months. He said he was sorry, though I noticed again that he did not specify for what, and that is never an insignificant detail. I told him I had not caused any of this. I told him the path that led him to my front porch on a Tuesday night was one he had built himself, deliberately, over what now appeared to be 8 years of choices. He left without arguing. I watched through the window as he got into a car I did not recognize. Not the truck he had driven for years, but an older sedan in a dull color, repossessed or sold under pressure. Probably in that order. The following morning, Evelyn called everyone in the extended family network. I know because 2 cousins reached out to me afterward with the particular awkward energy of people who have heard one version of events and suspect there is more. I thanked both of them. I did not show them the folder. I told them I was handling things appropriately through the right channels. Evelyn's version, the heartless sister, the ruined family, blood sacrifice to a credit score, was moving through the network. I noted it and kept working. The truth does not need to win at dinner tables. It needs to be documented carefully and completely. I had 2 years of documentation, organized by date and certified where necessary, and it was heading to court where it would finally be heard by people with the authority to act on it. Pretrial motions began on a gray October morning. Ruth and I arrived early. Michael's attorney opened with his strongest argument, that I had given Michael verbal permission years earlier at a specific family dinner to use my financial information as backing for his business in a genuine crisis. He named a date. He listed witnesses by name. Ruth placed a packet before the judge. Inside were gas station receipts, a motel invoice, and 3 separate toll records. All from the exact weekend of the dinner Michael's attorney had named, all placing me 300 miles away in another state, visiting Walter's grave at the cemetery where we had buried him 2 years before. I made that trip every year on that specific weekend. I had 4 years of records to prove it. The witnesses Michael's attorney had named began revising their memories once the records were entered and confirmed. 2 said the dinner must have been a different date. 1 said he had not been present himself, only heard about the conversation secondhand later. The argument dissolved entirely, and the judge struck it from the record without ceremony. I thought perhaps that was the last major surprise. Then Attorney Hollis approached Ruth during the afternoon recess. The bank holding the largest outstanding loan had been reviewing security footage from their branch locations. One of the loan signings, a transaction requiring in-person appearance with a valid photo ID, had been captured on camera. The person on camera was not Michael. She was a woman of approximately Deborah's height and build, wearing a wide-brimmed hat, appearing to present a copied identification document. Ruth looked at me over her reading glasses and said quietly, "This just got significantly larger than either of us thought when we started." I nodded once. I was not surprised exactly. I had learned not to be surprised by new damage. I was tired, but I was not surprised. Deborah had been a background presence throughout the case. Michael's wife, the laughter on that first terrible phone call, the woman who had hissed at me from a car window. Now she became central. The district attorney's office opened a formal parallel investigation, and the bank's fraud unit pulled footage from every signing connected to the fraudulent accounts. Michael called me at 2:15 in the morning, 3 days after the footage was confirmed in court filings. I answered because I was already awake, lying in the dark, thinking about the trial timeline. His voice was no longer the voice of the man who had laughed and called it paperwork. It was the voice of someone who had finally reached the actual bottom and found it was solid and cold. He said they were going to lose the house. He said he did not know what would happen to his children. He said he was genuinely sorry, and this time the word landed slightly closer to true than all the times before. I listened without interrupting. When he stopped, I said, "I hope your children are okay, Michael. I mean that sincerely." Then I said goodbye and set the phone on the counter. The next morning, a billing statement arrived for a credit card with a balance of $460, opened nearly 6 years ago. A card I had never applied for or held in my hand. I filled out the dispute form while the coffee was brewing and mailed it before noon. Ruth told me we were nearing the end of the credit dispute process, which was genuinely good news after so many months of fighting one account at a time. The criminal trial had a less certain timeline, and that uncertainty was its own kind of weight. I had learned by then that patience was not a passive state. It required active daily maintenance, the way a garden does, attention and effort, every single day, even when nothing visible appears to be changing. Trial opened on a cold November morning. The courtroom was fuller than any of the preliminary hearings had been. 2 local reporters occupied the back rows. Several of Michael's relatives sat on one side of the aisle. 2 cousins who had reached out to offer their quiet support after Evelyn's campaign sat just behind me on the other. Attorney Hollis called me first. I sat up straight in the witness chair and answered each question in the order she asked it, directly and without decoration. I described the debt collector's call on that Wednesday evening, the library parking lot, and the credit reports, and what $142,000 in debt looks like when you find it unexpectedly on a weekday morning. I described every loan I had ever made to Michael, the paper records going back 2 decades, and what it felt like to have 40 years of consistent generosity repaid in this particular way. Michael's attorney put Michael on the stand in the afternoon. He cried through portions of his testimony. He said he had only done it because he was desperate and believed he could repay everything before it became a real problem. He said he had never stopped caring about me. He said this in a voice that sounded genuinely broken. I watched the jury carefully as he spoke. Several leaned slightly toward him. A woman in the second row was blinking too frequently. A retired-looking man in the back had his arms crossed and had not shifted his posture once. Closing arguments were set for the following week. I drove home in the dark, feeling hollowed out in a specific way, not broken, just emptied. I sat at the kitchen table with tea going cold and thought, 40 years of showing up for someone. It comes down to 12 strangers and 2 more days. I had done everything I could do. Now I waited. The jury deliberated for 2 full days. I did not go to the courthouse during deliberations. I stayed home, pruned the lavender that had grown beyond the fence line, turned the compost, and kept my phone face up on the kitchen counter. Ruth called at 11:43 on a Thursday morning. She said guilty on all 3 identity theft counts, and both fraud counts. I sat down on the back porch step. The phone was still against my ear, and Ruth was still speaking, but I was not tracking the words yet. I was looking at the garden and thinking, for the first time in months, about Walter. About how much I wished you were here to see this particular Thursday morning. To sit beside me on these steps and say nothing because nothing would have needed to be said. Sentencing was set for 6 weeks out. Deborah's charges were still pending. My cousin Patrice, who had been in the courtroom, texted to tell me Evelyn had needed to be helped outside when the verdict was read. She recovered quickly and sat very still afterward. As I was leaving the courthouse after notification, Michael's attorney approached Ruth in the corridor. He proposed that Michael would agree to full restitution of every identified fraudulent dollar paid on a court-approved schedule in exchange for a letter from me to the sentencing judge requesting leniency. Ruth relayed the offer in the parking lot. I considered it for a long moment. Then I said I would write the letter, but only after every remaining fraudulent account was formally confirmed as removed from my credit reports. Not in process, confirmed in writing by the bureaus. His attorney called back the following morning before 9. Michael had accepted all conditions without negotiation or argument. The speed of his agreement told me more about where he was than anything he had said in months. He was out of options, and he knew it clearly. The last 2 large accounts came off my credit report within the month, exactly as the restitution arrangement required. 2 letters arrived on the same afternoon from 2 different bureaus, each confirming removal and noting it would appear in the next reporting cycle. I placed both letters at the front of the folder. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote the leniency letter to the sentencing judge. I was deliberate about every sentence. I did not minimize what Michael had done. I named the damage and its scope plainly. But I also stated that I believed in proportional consequences, that a sentence which eliminated his ability to work and earn restitution over time would serve no one well, including me. I asked that he be given the chance to make this right under close supervision. Ruth read the letter the next morning and said it was a good letter. She filed it with the court that afternoon. Then, during sentencing preparation, investigators released new findings that changed the picture once more. Michael had used my information on documents going back not 14 months, not 2 years, but 8 years. Older accounts, most written off or resolved by lenders long ago, but every one of them fraudulent. The cumulative total across the full timeline came to just under $200,000. The judge delayed sentencing for a complete review of the expanded record. I sat with the number 8 years for several evenings running. 8 years. He had been doing this across holiday dinners, across phone calls asking how I was doing, across the whole ordinary fabric of what I had believed was a functional family. That is a specific kind of ache. It does not have a clean name, but I came to know its shape very well over those evenings. The shape of a trust that had been built slowly and broken quietly over years, in the space between ordinary conversations. Sentencing was rescheduled for February. The courtroom was cold and quiet in the particular way that courtrooms become when everyone in them understands the gravity of what is taking place. The judge spent nearly 40 minutes reviewing the record before she spoke. She addressed the 8-year timeline. She addressed the expanded $200,000 total. She quoted 2 sentences from my leniency letter directly and without comment. Then she sentenced Michael to 18 months, with the majority suspended in exchange for full restitution paid on a court-approved schedule and 3 years of supervised probation. He would serve 60 days of the original sentence in custody. Deborah had accepted a plea to a lesser charge and received community service hours and a significant fine. Her attorney read a prepared statement of remorse that she did not look up from the paper to deliver. Evelyn sat in the back row of the courtroom in a dark coat. She was very still. She looked smaller than I had seen her look in many years. The particular smallness of a person who has been carrying something far too heavy for far too long and has finally been made to set it down. When the sentence was read, Michael stood. His attorney placed a steady hand on his arm. Then Michael turned and looked across the length of the courtroom. Across everything we had been to each other and everything that had become of it, and found my face directly. He said, quietly, "I never thought you would actually go all the way through with it." I looked at him for one steady moment. Then I said, "I never thought you would steal from me." Neither of us said anything more. His attorney guided him gently toward the door. I sat for a moment in the emptying room, hands folded, breathing slowly. Then I stood, collected the folder, and walked out into the February cold. The first restitution check came in the mail 6 weeks after sentencing. It arrived in a plain white envelope, and I recognized the handwriting immediately. Michael had always pressed hard with a pen, as if the words needed anchoring to the page. The note inside was 3 sentences. This is what we can send right now. We are going to keep sending. I am sorry. The check was smaller than the court-approved schedule required. Not dramatically smaller, but smaller in a way that was easy to calculate. I deposited it at the bank drive-through without ceremony and recorded it in the spreadsheet I had started. Michael and Deborah had sold their house. The sale covered a portion of the restitution, the legal fees, and the debt accumulated in their own names alongside everything accumulated in mine. They moved in with Evelyn, the 3 of them reorganizing around suitcases and the wreckage of what the previous years had made. I did not feel the satisfaction people sometimes imagine you feel at this point in a story like this. The image of Michael and Deborah and Evelyn in that small house was not one I returned to with pleasure. They were still people I had known my entire life. Michael was still the boy who fell asleep on long car rides when we were children, who used to wake up confused and slightly embarrassed when we arrived somewhere new. What I felt instead was a slow settling. A long exhale after a breath held far too long. The particular stillness that arrives when something that has been wrong for a long time is finally not undone, not erased, but properly acknowledged and addressed by the people and the systems that needed to address it. My house was still mine. My name was coming back to me, account by account and letter by letter. That was the foundation I had always needed. Everything else could be carefully rebuilt on top of it. I thought the chapter was closing. 5 months after sentencing, with payments arriving on schedule and the credit report clearing account by account, I allowed myself to believe the story was finally moving into its last pages. Then a letter arrived from a collection agency I did not recognize. It was a notice for a medical bill, $1,940, for an outpatient procedure at a clinic 40 miles from my house, billed in my name and social security number to an address I had not lived at since childhood. The procedure had apparently occurred 4 years earlier. The clinic mailed the bill to that old address, received it back undeliverable, wrote the amount off, and eventually sold the debt. The collection agency had tracked my current address through updated bureau records. I sat at my kitchen table with the letter and felt the weight of discovering that the damage went even further and older than the courts had fully mapped. Michael had apparently been more thorough across more years than even the investigators had realized. Ruth helped me dispute the account within the week. The documentation already in place made the counter-argument strong, and the resolution came in less than a month. But finding it unsettled something. I went to my doctor for what I told myself was a routine visit. She ran panels, asked careful questions, and listened to my heart longer than usual. She said I was physically fine, but showed physiological signs of prolonged stress management. She recommended deliberate rest and fewer demands on my time for a period. I sat in her exam room afterward in the paper gown and thought quietly about how much of my body's steady, reliable energy had been quietly redirected for months, just to keep me functional and moving and present, while all of this unfolded around me without pause. The body keeps its own kind of account. By early spring, every fraudulent account was gone. All 5 original accounts, all the smaller ones discovered during the investigation, the old medical bill, every single one cleared. The credit report I pulled on a Tuesday morning in March was clean in a way it had not been for nearly 2 years. I made a copy and put it at the front of the folder, then set the folder in the back of the spare bedroom closet and closed the door. My score had climbed back close to where it had been for the 35 years before any of this happened. Not exactly there yet. Close enough to feel genuinely mine again. I went back to volunteering at the senior center on the main road. They ran a free financial literacy program on Friday mornings, older residents learning to read their credit reports and understand their rights when something appeared that should not be there. I had offered my time the previous autumn, and they had a waiting list. I sat across a folding table from people in their 70s and 80s who were confused and frightened about numbers on a printed page. I walked them through fraud alerts and dispute procedures and documentation habits. I told them to keep copies of everything, labeled with dates. I told them the process was slow, but it worked if you pushed it correctly. Several of them asked whether I had personal experience with any of this. I said yes. I kept the details for myself unless they asked further and seemed like they would benefit from hearing more. Michael sent a larger than usual payment that month. Deborah had filed for divorce and moved out of state. Evelyn called once, her voice tired and honest, asking whether forgiveness was possible. I told her I was working toward it. Trust, I told her gently, was an entirely separate and much slower question. Michael came to my house on a Saturday in late May. He came alone. He walked up the front path slowly and knocked twice and waited. I opened the door. I did not open the screen. He was noticeably thinner than the last time I had seen him, the February courthouse morning when the judge read his sentence. He had grown a beard that was coming in gray at the edges, and he was wearing clothes that fit a smaller version of the man he used to be. He held his hands at his sides and did not try to step forward. He asked if there was anything useful he could do. He said yard work or errands or repairs. Anything that would let him contribute something beyond a check. He said money felt insufficient and he wanted to do something with his hands to make some part of this right. I looked at him through the screen for a moment. I told him the most useful thing he could do was keep paying what the court had ordered. On time, every month, without me having to track it. I told him that would do more good than any yard work. He nodded. He did not argue or push. He said, "Okay." Then he turned and walked back down the path to the curb. I watched him get into an ordinary car and drive away. The whole visit had lasted perhaps 6 minutes. I went inside and made a cup of tea and sat on the back porch in the late afternoon. The lavender was coming in along the fence. The tomato seedlings were doing well in their first month in the ground. The bees were working steadily from one plant to the next. I sat there for a long time and thought about nothing in particular. It was the first time in a very long while that nothing in particular felt like enough. The final restitution check came in 2 parts. Michael said what he had in October with a brief note explaining the shortfall, then said the remainder 3 weeks later in a second envelope. Together they closed the financial account between us for good. I used part of the recovered money to rebuild the savings buffer that had been slowly drained across 18 months of legal fees, dispute costs, and general financial uncertainty. I used another part to properly fix the garage door. The one spray-painted during the worst of it, then repainted quickly in a color that never quite matched the original. A small thing, but accurate things matter. The rest I donated to the credit counseling nonprofit that shared a building with the senior center where I volunteered on Friday mornings. They worked with people who had been through fraud, medical debt spirals, and the kind of cascading damage that occurs when someone with no resources encounters a legal and financial system that has many. I liked their work. It felt like nursing in the parts that mattered most, meeting someone at the bottom of something frightening and helping them understand what the next step looked like. Michael was working steadily at a distribution warehouse. Evelyn's health had stabilized. They lived quietly together in the house where we had both grown up before our father left, and things became what they became. There were no more large family gatherings. No more holiday dinners ending with a quiet pull-aside request in the hallway. No more borrowed money attached to borrowed promises. The absence of all of that was not grief exactly. It was more like the silence that arrives when a persistent background noise finally stops. A sound you had stopped consciously noticing so long ago that you only recognized it clearly for the very first time in the particular quality of quiet it left behind when it ended. I ran into Evelyn in the grocery store in November, in the produce section near the winter squash display. We both reached for something at the same moment and looked up and found each other. Neither of us had planned the encounter. She looked older. Not only the hard year older, which was visible enough, but the deeper kind. The kind that settles in when a person has been carrying something heavy for too long and has finally had to set it down, but still moves in the posture of someone carrying it. We stood in the aisle and talked for about 10 minutes. She asked about my health. I asked about hers. She told me Michael was doing well at the warehouse, that the routine seemed to suit him and he had found some steadiness in it. She mentioned that Deborah's departure had been harder than expected, even knowing it was coming. Then she stopped and looked at me directly in a way she had not done since before any of this began. She said, "I should have stopped him years ago, Helen. Not recently. Years and years ago. The first time he came to me with something that should have ended there, and I smoothed it over instead. I kept doing that. I was his excuse instead of his mother, and I am sorry." I had not braced myself for those words, which meant I received them without a prepared response. They simply landed. I told her I heard her. I told her it meant something real. We did not make plans or exchange warmth that would have felt dishonest. We said goodbye and went through separate checkout lanes. Driving home with both hands on the wheel, I thought about what people expect the aftermath of something difficult to look like, and what it actually looks like. Small, ordinary, honest, real. A conversation near the winter squash. Two women finding their way to something true. My credit report is clean and has been for 9 months. I check it quarterly now, a habit I will keep for the rest of my life. The way you stay aware of a lock after your home has been entered without your permission. Not from fear, from good sense. I live the same life in my small house 2 blocks from the coast. Biscuit has decided my lap is acceptable seating during evenings, which was not my preference, but which I have accepted. The garden did well this year. I put up tomatoes in August for the first time in several years. Michael pays what he owes each month. We do not speak often, and when we do, the conversations are brief and not unkind. The relationship we had before is gone, and I do not believe it is returning. What remains is something I do not have a clean word for. Not friendship, not estrangement, but the particular connection of 2 people who share a long history and understand now, clearly, what that history actually contained. I still volunteer at the senior center on Friday mornings. Since I began, I have helped over 40 people read or dispute their credit reports. Some of their stories sound familiar to me. I tell them mine when it would help them believe the system actually moves, slowly, imperfectly, requiring more patience than seems fair, but it moves, because it does. I am the proof of that. If you have been the reliable one, the person your family counted on to absorb things and keep going, and someone turned that reliability against you, hear this. Your name belongs to you. Your peace belongs to you. File the report, keep the folder, tell the truth every time someone asks. The quiet ones who were never supposed to fight back sometimes turn out to be exactly the ones who do. I am Hannah Whitaker, and I did not give up. If this story hit you somewhere deep, if you've ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to protect you, or if you know what it feels like to have your voice taken away by someone who smiled while they did it, then you already know why Brooke's story matters. This is the kind of story we tell here. Real stakes, real consequences, real people who refuse to fold. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next one. Because the stories coming are even more powerful than this one, and you don't want to be the last person to hear them. And before you go, drop a comment and tell me, where are you watching from? And what part of Brooke's story hit you the hardest? Share this with someone who needs to hear that staying quiet can be the most powerful move you make, and that the truth always finds its way to the surface, no matter how deep someone tries to bury it. We'll see you in the next one.